Well, this is like old home week with everybody in here. So many of you were in the documentary. Truly, I want to thank all of the state officials and the Iowa Lottery who were part of this case. Without the dedication and the fits and stops and sticking with it, this documentary, this case never would have come to be. So that's something for all of us to be proud of. One of the questions that I had when I was watching the show was, and I wonder if people are left with, how did we know immediately when the lovely gentleman from Canada called us that there was something wrong? Well, I asked him, of course, for the identifying number from the ticket.
Since these guys are standing here, can you stand right over there and then?
Yes, I asked him for, do you want me to turn towards you, Terry, or the other way? So I asked him for the identifying code from the ticket, which, as the documentary notes, we had been hearing from person after person saying they were the winner, and they had all these different scenarios about my ticket was stolen, my dog ate my ticket, I'm afraid it's in my dead friend's car, but none of them had the code until Philip Johnston called. And so I was the one who talked to Philip. And so remember, we had the hoodie guy footage from the beginning of the case. And so I asked Philip Johnston, well, obviously you saw me asking him what brought him to Des Moines. And I said, do you remember what you were wearing when you bought the ticket? And he went into this very detailed explanation about the sports jacket and gray flannel dress pants he was wearing when he bought the ticket. And so I knew immediately that this was not the case, that he was not the winner, that there was something wrong in this situation. And so then I immediately called security and our assistant attorney general at the time and said, we need to look into this more. And everything that proceeded from there led to the documentary that you see here today. So that's how we knew immediately that there was something wrong. So I have questions for several folks in the audience here today, just because you have all been part of this story. We have all been part of this story. So Governor Branstad, Ambassador Branstad, I want to start with you. You have given presentations at the Iowa Lottery before. I have been part of presentations to you and your staff up at the Capitol. And Terry mentioned this earlier, but truly the only thing I have ever heard you emphasize was that you wanted to make sure the lottery was being run with integrity. And I know that's important to you. Did anything like this ever come to mind when you would make those comments? And I'll give you the mic.
This turned out to be much more elaborate than I ever imagined it could be. But I had vetoed lotteries twice before I finally signed this one. And Ed Stanek approached me and said, after they'd had a big lotto prize in Illinois, he said, there's a lot of people that would like to play the lottery. And frankly, thousands of people in eastern Iowa had bought lottery tickets and sent me the spent tickets to say, Governor, if we can't do it in our state, we're going to spend our money out of state. And Stanek said to me, if you change your mind and sign the lottery, I will run it and see to it that the integrity of the state is totally protected. And so I told the legislature, if you build all these safeguards in other words, the person, first of all, if you work for the lottery, you can't win.
Thanks.
And if you and you have to be, it has to be claimed in person. So we built all these safeguards into the law. And I told the legislature, if you do all of this, I will sign it. Now, the interesting thing about that was the legislature indeed followed through and did that. And Stanek, who's a brilliant guy, and he was the first director of the lottery, followed by Terry Rich. But he ran it that way, and I can say that the lottery has been run with total commitment to integrity. I also, everybody that I interviewed to serve on the lottery board, I told them, your most important responsibility is to protect the integrity of the state. Because I had read about all the cheating that had gone on in other states. And I didn't want to happen in Iowa because we have a reputation for integrity and honesty that I wanted to protect. And so I would say that I'm really proud of the way it's been managed, and it's been really well done. And a film, I think, tells a story, the extreme effort that was made to protect the state's integrity, and it worked. So congratulations to all of you that were involved in it, and I'm really proud of you.
Thank you. It sounds kind of strange to say you're really proud of that story, but no, I get it. I get it.
Proud of what you all did. We always suspected that when there's that much money at stake, there's going to be people that are going to want to cheat. And you were successful in preventing a very elaborate, effective scheme from getting from being successful.
People do crazy things for money. Rob Sand, you are the prosecutor who picked up this case and stuck with it. There had been fits and starts for a long time in this case. Can you tell us, and I'll give you the microphone, what you saw in this case that you decided to stick with it? And then I think the question that everybody has is, do you know, has there been any restitution made by Eddie Tipton and the Friends and Family Plan?
Well put. Credit in part to Matt Anderson back here, who was a really important part of this case, as well as Don Smith, who I didn't see here, 2 DCI agents that worked really hard on this whole thing. When we were working on it, I would tell you it was less that we knew that there was something there and more that we wanted to do a good job. And sometimes doing a good job involves just dotting your I's and crossing your T's because that's what you're taught to do. And I wish I could tell you that I have some inkling that it was going to turn out like this, and it wasn't. It was just doing our work, doing our jobs. And sure enough, as it built, it became something that really, obviously, they laid out in here that was quite a story and took a lot more work to unravel. But to me, that's part of the lesson here is this is, to Ambassador Brandsted's point, a lot of it, Iowa has to do with integrity. And I think to his credit, as well as to Terry Rich's credit, all of us from them on down all the way wanted to make sure that we figured out what the truth was about what was going on. And that to us was the bottom line. On the second question, they agreed to pay it. My understanding is that their Wisconsin agreement says that if they aren't paying it, they can still be hauled into prison in Wisconsin right now today. Whether or not that's progressing is a different question. I know that Oklahoma tried to get some payments and they appealed. The Tiptons appealed and lost their appeal. So hopefully that would be starting soon. But no, I couldn't tell you beyond all of that.
Governor, I don't want to trip over you. It's the story that never ends. There's someone who was not on camera in this case, but I have a question for him. He's sitting beside Governor Branstad. His name's Cam Coppus. So Steve Bogle was on camera. He was one of the vice presidents of security at the Iowa Lottery during this case, and Cam Coppus was the other. Cam, you came in about halfway through the case, or maybe 2/3 of the way through the case, and it was already obvious by then that authorities believed there were more tickets in play than just the Iowa ticket. And so you, from your law enforcement experience, immediately wanted to do something in this case that hadn't been done yet because you thought it would reveal important things. Can you tell us what that was and what it did reveal?
So I was taken into a room with Rob Porter and Terry Rich, and they showed me a PowerPoint of this whole investigation. And they asked me what I thought. And my first response to them was, well, I thought it was over. I didn't know it was still ongoing because came into this very late in the game. And so what I could see was there was a lot of good work done by a lot of people. And it was kind of like it was a jigsaw puzzle and there was still a piece missing. And so the question I had for them after seeing the PowerPoint was I'd heard that these tickets had been purchased and what the states were, but I wanted to know where. And the best way to see where was to map each of the incidents where the tickets had been purchased. And so I wanted 2 slides added to the PowerPoint, a map of where the tickets were purchased. And then I wanted I'd call it metadata, or the information about when they were purchased. So the next day they'd bring me back into the room again, and they said, we got your 2 slides, and they put up the slide of the United States. And from Des Moines to Houston, along Interstate 35 is where these tickets had been purchased. Well, Eddie Tipton, of course, had taken vacation to go home during the holidays, home being Houston. So that fit the story that was found by other people. But when the second slide came up, Terry and Rob's jaws dropped because we saw the 5 tickets had been purchased, two on December 29th and 3 on November 23rd. In order to find that computer code, they needed some kind of needle, something that would point to that. And so getting those dates of when the code was going to take effect helped them then call to the forensic computer examiners to say, look for an if-then statement that says, if these dates, then make this action to make the universe of draw much smaller. And it was that last piece that fit into the rest of the investigation that they found the malicious code.
Cam's map made such a huge difference. I'm gonna walk up the stairs here. I'm next going to pick on Rob Porter. You saw Rob Porter in the video. Rob was the lottery's corporate counsel at the time, and so it was the True Rob show, I think. But Rob Sand had you searching through computer records like crazy. And I remember you being in your office for days at a time, searching through records. Can you tell us about that work?
Sure. And I like to stand. You want as big of a target as possible, right? Okay, that's fine. That's fine. And so, and I like to refer to it as Rob Classic and New Rob, but you were an outstanding resource. And one of the things we had to do as you got the tip that Eddie Tipton may have been involved in claiming other jackpots and influencing other jackpots is we had to reach out to every muscle member lottery saying we wanted records of their winners over a defined date, and then we had to comb through them. I was combing through them. DCI was combing through them. We were comparing notes. As you can imagine, it wasn't an easy thing to get records from other lotteries who really considered this an Iowa problem, and they didn't necessarily want to turn over their records. Some were far more helpful than others, but we ultimately found patterns in those records that you were able to weave into a successful prosecution.
I think it just shows the many hands who were involved in this case. Now, I asked this next person if it's okay if I ask him a question, because at one point he would have had a job where he would not have wanted to be on camera. But Matt Anderson was a DCI agent who was involved in this investigation. Matt, you were one of the folks who went to Canada, who met with Philip Johnston. You did a heck of a lot of other work on this case. Can you tell us about your initial meeting with Mr. Johnston and then your other work on this case, including the video?
Well, to answer your question, Mary, I would say that Phil was unique and exquisite. He truly, I mean, he didn't, I believe he didn't want to come to Iowa because we had drafted a complaint for his arrest and gave him a timeline to respond. So he did. I believe he thought if he came to Iowa, we'd just arrest him. So he had a heart condition. We met him there. Tom Miller and Steve Bogle and I traveled up. But it was just, he broke down how many offshore accounts he had, how many were just on the shelf accounts. I mean, he talked about it all, but he ultimately pointed out our next travel trip to Houston with the Robert and Roberts down there. So it was very interesting, enjoyable, but he ultimately then explained why the amount of money that he would made off of that $10 million payout and how quickly it would have vastly exceeded the $16 million. So he was quite the financial wizard. So it was enjoyable. But without your original interview of him saying that, but that gray suit, I drafted my complaint with that. I mean, that's where the fraud came from, of him saying he's the original owner. So without that, I don't know if Phil ever comes to the table, but it was well done by you. And then to what everybody else has said, the lottery flipped the bill on that, the integrity of these trips down to Houston, up to Quebec City. They were all in, and it was was great to be a part of it.
Thank you. I'm not an investigator, nor do I play one on TV. But I just remember how many people did not want to meet with you. You would go to Houston and no one wanted to talk, or you would go to Canada and people would be avoiding you. Dave Jobs, you headed the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation during this case. And as I mentioned earlier, as I think we all saw in the film itself, there were a lot of fits and starts in this case. And Thomas H. Miller, perhaps you can speak to this as well. I'll give it to Dave first, and then he can hand it over to you. What were the fits and starts, and ultimately, why did you stick to it later? I think a lot of it had to do with the release of the video that finally broke the doors open.
Thanks. Yeah, I think Rob Sand spoke to it a little bit earlier. It's a desire to get to the bottom of it. It was a job unfinished. We didn't have the answers. Investigators knew there was more to the story. Nobody knew where it was going to end. Nobody imagined it was going to be as detailed or as extravagant of a story as it ended up being. But everyone knew there was more to the story, and nobody wanted to let it go. And so there was always something more. And so it would stop because there was just nothing else that could be done. And there would be a change in personnel, or our people would change assignments, and someone else new would come in, and they would pick up the case and start looking at it. And so it was just a desire to see it come to fruition. And then new life comes in, and new ideas come in, and it just continues forward. And a lot of credit to everyone involved, and to Rob Sand and to Tom Miller and Matt Anderson, Don Smith later, folks at the lottery, Steve Bogle and Cam Coppus, Terry Rich, everyone, yourself included, Mary, just not willing to let it go and pushing it forward. So,
Will you hand the mic to Thomas H. Miller?
Thank you, Mary. Just to echo a couple brief points, Matt's absolutely right. The case kicked off as an investigation when you made that recorded phone call. Had it not been for your quick wit, we wouldn't have got on to Phil Johnston. It was shortly after that Terry and all your crew invited me and a few others to meet and discuss the possibility of an investigation for fraud, and it was apparent that there was some fraud involved. The fits and starts were first trying to get cooperation of Phil Johnston, and that's to the credit of Matt Anderson. He wasn't about to come to Iowa from Canada, but Matt persuaded him to sit down with us in Quebec City, which we did, and he explained to us his career moving money out of Canada from that high tax jurisdiction to the Caribbean, and that not all of his customers were drug dealers, but he did give us as a very, actually it wasn't a statement, it was a hint. He said he had a phone call with Sonnenheim, and that he isn't sure, but he thought he recognized the voice of Robert Rhodes in the background. So that gave us Robert Rhodes, and from there we had 2 links in the 3-link chain, but Matt would never let me release that video, and neither would Bogle. And they're cops. Cops don't let go of evidence if they can avoid it. But it continued. We did identify Rhodes, and shortly before I retired in 2014 as Deputy Attorney General, I turned to the one person I felt could be trusted to carry the ball further. It's a white-collar whodunit, and that doesn't appeal to every prosecutor. We like cases with a lot of blood on them sometimes, but this was really more of a whodunit, and it took more twists and turns after Rob took control of it than were imaginable at the time I left. But anyway, congrats to everybody. Particular credit to the governor and Mr. Rich for insisting on chasing down the truth without regard to who might be affected, including the lotteries themselves.
It is amazing to look back at it. And when I recently went back to listen to the interview, the recorded telephone interview, because I hadn't heard it for years and years, I thought, gosh, he sounds Canadian. And then I listened to myself and I thought, gosh, I sound Midwestern. So I guess we fit the bill perfectly. Ed Stefen, you're in the unique situation here of actually having worked with Eddie Tipton in what was really an unfortunate story in the end. What do you think the lasting legacy of this all is?
I think it's an interesting story. You see somebody, I've known Eddie Tipton for what now, 40 years, right? Something like that, coming up on it. And it's a story about remembrance for all of us that, we think we know somebody and then maybe we don't. And the essence of control is comparison to a standard. And so in the manager's hands, we can go ahead with that control framework in place. We can say, okay, what would somebody be willing to do? As I expressed to Rob, I think, at some point during this is like, okay, is a single deadbolt lock enough? And what about a double deadbolt? What about a double deadbolt with a chain? What about a double deadbolt with a chain with a Doberman? At what point does it end? Before or after the AK-47 is, guy sitting there. So, but it's a conversation about the M&Ms, right? If you present somebody an opportunity to put their hands in that jar of M&Ms, they likely will. It's just a matter of time. I remember when the DCI was asking me, because Eddie worked directly for me, right? I was like, well, surely you would have known. You've known this guy forever. You guys were friends for a long time. I was like, well, no. I said, well, you've got a price. Everyone's got a price. And I remember saying, well, I certainly hope I don't have one, right? But I find it interesting that really it comes down to the humanity of all of us to say, why are we going to put anybody? Why aren't we going to love on each other enough? Why wouldn't I love on you enough? Why wouldn't I love on you and you and you and you and you enough to absolutely ensure, more than assure, that there is no opportunity to get themselves in a pot of hot water, right? Let's go ahead and establish the segregation of controls, separation of responsibilities and duties to absolutely positively make it certain that this and something like this isn't going to ever happen again. I believe Eddie. When he was in trial in front of the judge, and he says, I'm sorry. I wish I hadn't done it. It's just that jar of M&Ms was too much for him, and I feel that, and I know that as far as all the lives impacted, all of my friends at the multi-state lottery, and there's just a good group of people. The lottery industry we're tight, and so I think that the lasting legacy of this is that there really can't be too much conversation about how much control is enough control, how much security is enough security, how many levels does it take. When I was interviewed and I told the interviewee or interviewer, I said, Eddie messed up like 9 times. That's true. I'm mindful of a conversation that happened down here about, well, I don't want to give up the rest of the story. And there is the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say, dating myself just a little bit now, now for page 2, that there is even more to the internal controls of the lottery than this indicates. And Eddie had internal knowledge of what those extra controls were, and yet chose to operate this way regardless. I really think the man wanted to be caught. But this is how, somebody in here said, something like, well, people make mistakes and that's how we catch them. And that's 100% accurate. I think in this particular case, Eddie made so very many mistakes. He was almost screaming for help. And I feel sorry for him. But because he is a good human being, and now he's kind of stayed in the background a little bit, and it doesn't surprise me that he's not subjecting himself to interviews. Who among us would want that in our lives? We're like, I got enough drama, right? But I think the legacy is that, a bunch of smart people in a room together can miss things. And I think it's really easy to think that we have all of the answers as individuals, and really we don't. Collectively, we're better. And so we have to stop and think, how many ways can we prevent there from being an issue? And, what element of control is adequate? And if we establish that framework, will do well. And I know that the multi-state lottery personnel were absolutely devastated and distraught by this whole thing, as is Iowa Lottery and everybody else. And you know, all kinds of good things were said about, you know, the Iowa Lottery and all the other lotteries. And it's like, oh my goodness, how could this possibly have happened? And so the legacy is of active preventative from ever having it happen again.
Yep. This will be the last question, and this is for someone who was not in the documentary but played a really important part of this. Jeff Keeker was on the jury for the Eddie Tipton case, and Jeff and I were talking beforehand. I recently served on jury duty myself, and it's hard, and it wasn't even nearly the case that you were handed in this situation. So obviously, when you go to court, you don't know what case you're going to get. Can you walk us through your thought processes or the jury's thought processes in this case?
I do remember everyone in the jury did such a great job taking notes throughout the whole trial, and they were very diligent. And when we were kind of, you know, trying to decide was he guilty or not, it got kind of serious, and we decided to take one last look at the video of him purchasing the ticket. I believe there was evidence brought forward that he had rented a white car to drive to Texas. Mm-hmm. So you could clearly see him go into that white car. So that weighed heavy against him. Then we voted, and there were people that were in the jury that were like crying because they're like, we're going to send this person to prison for a long time. So, and the funny thing is about the hot dogs, because I remember his brother saying that in court, and I'm going, that guy's lying. But yeah, it was a great experience for me.
I'm glad to hear you say that. It speaks to our civic duty, I think. Ed has touched on this, but truly there have been enormous changes in the security protocols within the lottery and within lottery drawings in particular as a result of this case. And I think that's the best outcome that could have happened. The other thing I will just publicly divulge in this room is that Rob Sand can predict the future, because once the video of the ticket being purchased was released, you wouldn't believe how many people called us and said they had a black hoodie and that they were at that store. Jason, yes, I'm sorry, Jason, the intrepid reporter who was in the show. You covered this case from start until now, correct? Or at least almost the start until now. And I saw that you did talk with the documentary producers. Just tell us your thoughts today, because there must be a million things zinging through your head.
Thank you. My biggest perception of this as I was covering this is that it's highly unlikely that this would have been uncovered had Iowa not had the in-person claim and the public information of knowing who is claiming these tickets. And it ran through my mind several times when reporting that this could happen in other states and could be happening, and that we don't know the full extent, and that without these safeguards, the public knowledge of this, this is probably the biggest security weapon that we could have against lottery fraud. And that it made sense to me as I was reporting this that there would be more states that adopt rules like Iowa have to make clear who's winning and make them claim in person. And that's not happening. And so that's still, even today, I haven't worked on this specific story for a number of years, but at the time there were far more states that did not have rules that were in place to make that happen. So I think that is my biggest takeaway in this is a fascinating, interesting story, but we can and probably should do more as a nation to secure our lottery system. And to me, that's what's still missing.
Mary Ellen, are you allowed to speak on behalf of the company today, or is there anything you would want to add?
No, I mean, I can.
Okay. I didn't know if there.
No, you're good.
You in a bad
Identify yourself.
No, so yeah, I'm Mary Beth Biga. I'm currently the division operations manager in Des Moines. And so I would just say that safety and security is the top priority for us at Quick Trip, and it's great when all things align and we're able to help out. So we're happy to be here.
What we're going to do next then is I'd like to have the people who were in the lottery business or in the show to come down. I want to just consolidate and just get one quick picture. Press, we'd like to take one as a big group, great. If not, you can set up, and if you've got somebody specifically, you have one follow up, so you have an exclusive, we can do that. And then we'll be set for you guys, and then we'll have the rest of you just give a little testimony what you thought of the deal in one sentence out here in the hallway, and we'll be ready to rock and roll. So right now, Terry,